So I don't know what kind of Pesach albums you listen to in your home. Probably, when people had albums and records. But we had this record in the home that had a whole bunch of songs about Pesach. Not your typical Kadesh or Chatz, your Seder and Haggadah songs, but it had a lot of, one of the songs was called Let's Go Shopping, Pesach Shopping. And then there was a song about cleaning for Pesach, picking up chametz, maybe you can do it. Picking up chametz, picking up the bread. I think the woman's name was Gewurtz who sang it. There were Seder paraders, if anyone is familiar with it and remembers the name of the album, feel free to chime in. Otherwise, you can probably Google it. And so there was Pesach is a holiday with a lot of preparation, but the Pesach concept it's entered the mainstream, and that's will get us started with the article about Trader Joe's matzah. I don't know if anyone here is using Trader Joe's matzah. Most people I know get the free 5-pound boxes with their Stop and Shop purchases, or whichever supermarket it is. The article appeared in the JTA last week. It's in source number 1. For millennia, Jews have eaten matzah, and for years, Jewish patrons at Trader Joe's have been able to purchase matzah off the shelves of the tiki-themed grocery chain, which has gained its own quasi-religious following. Now, for the first time ever, Trader Joe's will be selling matzah under its own famous private label. Question even among the store's diehard Jewish fans is, what makes Trader Joe's branded matzah different from all other matzah? Right, manish tana. Some shoppers said they were excited about the new offering, while others wondered whether it would be any different from the matzah Trader Joe's has sold in previous years. And in fact, it had been selling Holy Land matzah, and the article mentions trying to ascertain whether it's still considered Holy Land matzah just with a different label. It probably is. Still others said that putting its name on the most quintessential Jewish foods, Trader Joe's signals that Pesach products have gone mainstream. In the words of Susan Robinson, a member of Kosher Trader Joe's, a Facebook group with more than 63,000 members. Alas, I am not one of them. The decision also demonstrates that Trader Joe's takes its kosher observant customers seriously, said Rachel B. Gross, a professor at San Francisco State University, who teaches a course on U.S. Jews and the history of food. My understanding is that they've never wanted to do everything, Gross said, but they have had a really strong kosher game because that's worked really well with the way they approach the niche markets in general. Gross said the conversation over Trader Joe's matzah fits with the way Americans celebrate Passover, which she said is intimately tied to brands. She cited the proliferation of well-known Passover products like the Haggadah published by Maxwell House Coffee, which I never had growing up, which was first printed more than 90 years ago, or Manischewitz's many Passover foods. The way the holiday has been shaped by brands, she said, is in some sense a traditional American Jewish experience. Jews have really learned over the last 110, 120 years how to trust brands, and trust brands around kashrut, especially around Passover, Rosh JTA. So there's a number of items to unpack from the shopping bag for this conversation. And one is how products catch on culturally and even maybe have attained a certain type of quasi-religious status, and with regards to the way some of the laws of Pesach work with regards to food in terms of what's on the table, what's on the menu, and maybe a couple of sources that can be springboards for how certain items have become part of the Passover experience. And there's also the Jewish community in America and its impact in making things, taking things into the mainstream culturally. Obviously, there's the economics of Passover. I think the article mentioned that the Trader Joe's brand matzah this year was 20 cents more than the Holy Land last year, but still cheaper than some of the classic Jewish brands like Manischewitz. Who remembers the old Harwitz Margaretten? Now that's a name. But Pesach and food are intertwined, mostly because one of the most important commandments about Pesach relates to food, whether it be eating the matzah or getting rid of the chametz, which requires a whole host of products and practices, and which leads to all types of different manufacturing and finding solutions. That's the subject we're going to cover. And the fact that Trader Joe's kosher has so many adherents and people pay attention and try to analyze their every move is an example of it making it to the mainstream. Questions, comments, reactions, Anyone buy Trader Joe's matzah? Anyone taste it? A lot of people have a custom not to eat matzah in the 2 weeks before Pesach. It's actually a very strong law not to eat matzah on Erev Pesach itself. But any reactions, questions, comments as we get underway, I'm happy to take at this time.
We always had the minhag not to eat matzah from Purim.
Yeah,
there
so
were
that
2 more weeks I could have been eating it.
Yeah, some people, are happy the longer they can't eat matzah. But so that practice comes from the ruling in the Talmud of 30 days before the holiday, you're supposed to prepare for the holiday. And it's also based upon the idea that eating matzah on Pesach night is probably the only biblically ordained eating that Jews still have today. For all the eating that we do, most of it is discretionary or voluntary. It's not obligatory, but matzah at the Seder is an obligation, which opens up a whole another lane of this conversation, the fact that they've developed different types of matzah from different grains that might be more easily digested by those with certain gluten allergies. What happens if someone is gluten-free? What happens if someone, celiac? These are all questions that come up and are dealt with extensively because it's so important to eat matzah. And, obviously you can't endanger your life, but maybe you should be willing to suffer through a little discomfort to eat matzah. And that's where the whole conversation comes up. But yeah, certainly as we get closer to eat matzah less so that we eat it with gusto, so we avoid eating it as Pesach approaches. Any other reactions to Trader Joe's matzah before we jump into some products and some menu items and some practices? Okay, so source number 2 is from Pesachim 109, and here is I think speaks for a lot of the whole Barton's phenomenon when it comes to Pesach. So Rabbi Akiva, it said about Rabbi Akiva that he would distribute roasted grains and nuts to children on Passover Eve, so that they would not sleep and so they would ask. Right, the roasted grains is also sometimes translated as sweetened grains, and it's like candy. All right, the idea was to keep the kids awake, to keep the kids engaged. And so this idea of having candy on Pesach is an important piece, right? There's the fact they call them Seder mints, right? The Seder mint is really a fulfillment of this directive or this practice of Rabbi Akiva. You're supposed to have candy. And if we're talking about candy, is there anything that says Pesach other than the fruit slices, the jellied fruit slices? That are very famous for their neon colors and the like. And it certainly has been, just like some of the old time Passover treats are no longer as welcome as they used to. I'm sure you're all thinking macaroons, and we'll talk about those too. But what's the story? What's the deal with kosher fruit jelly slices? And there was an article in the Forward a couple of years ago, The Secret Jewish History of Those Kosher Fruit Jelly Slices. The fruit jelly slice is an American product invented sometime between the 2 world wars in either Winnipeg, Manitoba, or in Boston. 2 companies claim to have invented it. The shape of the jelly, like the shape of McDonald's McRib, can't say I'm familiar with that one, pays homage to something that it is not. That something happens to be the candied fruit, the grandfather of all modern confections. And so the article actually does a pretty good job of tracing some of the history of candy, and that it really, if you go all the way back to some of the civilizations thousands of years ago, dried fruit was the sweet treat that people enjoyed. As sugar came onto the scene, it was not so simple to turn sugar into an enjoyable product, a candied product. It took some time and some innovation, and eventually it certainly became something that was used to sweeten all sorts of foods. And it went through different challenges, different times in history. It was rationed, World War II, etc. But fast forward to today, in a globalized, industrialized society, observance in Jewish law leads to all kinds of strange and unintended consequences as our knowledge of the world unfolds onto objects, experiences, and activities unmapped by rabbinic legislators. Case in point, Though Passover was ostensibly about eating matzah, so much of the de facto Ashkenazi Passover diet comprises ingredients that the rabbis of antiquity either rarely ate, sugar and seaweed. He talks about how the candy sugar slice is really comprised of agar-agar, is what allows it to keep its form and its texture. Had never heard of coffee. I think of Maxwell House, or a cultivated place that the rabbis didn't know existed. Potatoes, chocolate, and quinoa all originated in the Americas. The success of the fruit jelly slice is the production of a moment in time when Jewish legal interests and American industry accidentally collided. It's a quirk, yes, but so is the maror and matzah sandwich we eat in the Seder in memory of something that was convenient for Hillel once upon a time. Tradition is quirky. The bigger our universe, the quirkier it gets. The best we can do is enjoy its fruits. I'd rather have the real fruit than the candy fruit, but it is interesting to note that there's the products that we enjoy on Pesach are sometimes the product of necessity, which ingredients we have, which we can't have, and the introduction of products that fill the void. And so you're looking for candy. First off, candy, we got to have candy. Rabbi Akiva had candy. We want to have candy. Candy is already in the religious consciousness of Pesach. Let's insert what we can. You can't have certain products, and you're pointing out that some of them, the classic jellying agents, the lecithin is viewed as kitniot. So all of a sudden, the candy jelly fruit slices fit a niche. Candy, kosher Pesach, let's have it. Certain things are probably also, a little bit cultural. Not sure in your experience, but somehow the chocolate-covered orange peels only appealed in Pesach time. Not sure if that's an extension of the fruit concept or trying to find the alternative. Suffice it to say, these days, I find jellied fruit slices less commonly popular than once upon a time. And then there, of course, will be something new that will take its place. So any questions or reactions to the jellied fruit slices and the candy of Rabbi Akiva? Anyone want to stand up and defend the jellied fruit slices? Otherwise, I'm not buying them this year.
No, I don't. Excuse me. I never liked jelly fruit slices, but for me, Pesach was synonymous with cocoa-covered almonds. That was a treat.
Well, there too, you can't have, look, desserts usually move away from the cakes. Now they have cake mixes and everything like that, but move away from cakes and into candy because it's kosher at Pesach.
Oh, you forgot to mention, we had to sell candy for our religious schools.
Oh, there you go. That's the Girl Scout equivalent.
Oh, you bet.
And which, by the way, I know people have heard there's a big scandal in Girl Scout cookies this year. They had introduced a new cookie and they ran out of supply, and it's not a good year to be a Girl Scout.
But they're kosher and they have gluten-free.
Yes. Well, as we're gonna get to gluten-free in a minute. Some would say I should talk about macaroons now, but we're gonna save macaroons for after the next discussion, which has to do with another classic food that entered the mainstream, and those are matzah balls, in particular, knedel, because in 2013, knedel was the winning word in the National Spelling Bee. And as Jessica Rodriguez writes, in a great source for some news for a Pesach shir, the Christian Post, spelling bee controversy was winning word knedel spelled wrong. Spelling bee controversy, I sent the Scripps National Spelling Bee last week after the winning word was later claimed to have been spelled incorrectly. The word knedel, K-N-A-I-D-E-L, was spelled to win the competition. However, since the result was confirmed, some Yiddish speakers and experts have said that the winning word was not spelled corrected. They believe the word can be spelled a number of ways, none of which was a spelling that won the contest. Knedel with a Y, K-N-E-Y-D-L, knedel, that seems completely wrong, or even knedel, K-N-E-I-D-E-L. Suffice it to say, there was a machlokas between the dictionary people and the Yivo, Yiddish people. Scripps does not follow Yivo. I'm sure Yivo is insulted by that, but so be it. But knedel entered. I can wonder, what was the word? What was the sentence? If anyone's ever participated in the spelling bee, you could get a word, so you could say it, and then Can you please use it in a sentence? Like, what was the sentence? Morris's family enjoyed the knedel on Pesach because he ate gebrachts. Was that the sentence? Something like that. So makes you wonder. But so just like there's a controversy over the spelling of knedel, there's a controversy over the eating of knedel, which is representative of a concept which is runs through the preparation and celebration of Pesach, which is what's called in the Aramaic Chumra de Pesach, Hachumrot shel Pesach, being more strict and careful on Pesach, because also the fact that the Torah says that anyone who eats chametz is spiritually cut off from the Jewish people. It's a pretty serious sin to violate any chametz on Pesach, and because of that, we have to get rid of the chametz and not see it, and not own it, and not eat it. And we go we're very zealous in avoiding it and not having it, and we'll clean all sorts of things in ways that we never would imagine to get rid of it, or this is how it has become popularly applied. So where does this idea come from, that we can't have a knedel? And it is all connected to what's called the matzah shriya. Are you allowed to make matzah wet? In Yiddish, they call it gebracht because gebracht means broken. Generally speaking, you're going to break the matzah before you make it wet, because who needs just a solid wet matzah? Although I will say, if you are making matzah pizza, a very helpful technique is to wet the matzah first before you start setting it out. Obviously, if you like to move this to the next level and make matzah lasagna, right? These are words that don't really fit together, but I guess for those of us who celebrate Pesach, it becomes normal. Right, it's like that. There was a funny meme going around about phrases that only Orthodox Jews understand. Did he have us in mind? Which is, what you wonder when someone is saying kiddush for you, or today we say whole and tomorrow we say half, which could apply to the hallel or the tachlin, right? So, matzah pizza, matzah lasagna are not things that the average Gentile would understand, but those of us in the club can appreciate. So when it comes to soaking matzah, it's very clear in the Shulchan Aruch that you're allowed to have wet matzah. Shulchan Aruch, source number 5, one fulfills the mitzvah of matzah using matzah soaked in water as long as it hasn't lost its shape. Right? It can't be into pieces. Matzah farfel doesn't work for fulfilling the mitzvah of matzah. But one cannot fulfill the matzah with cooked matzah. You can't cook it. So, all right, so you can't make a matzah brai. You can't use for the mitzvah, but you can have wet matzah to fulfill the mitzvah. Ideally, it's not, but it's certainly allowed to be utilized. So if that's the case, what's wrong with making matzah wet? So it seems that one of the first references was from a Greek rabbi in the 16th century, Rabbi Moshe Almosnino, who wrote a book called Olat Shabbat, and in dealing with the laws of Pesach, wrote, and one who's concerned for the stringency of any possibility of chametz entering on Pesach should only use matzah baked before Pesach, and should not cook a baked matzah on Pesach either. For how is it different than baking? You don't want to cook. If you want to avoid it, you don't want to be baking or preparing any matzah products on Pesach. There was actually a practice that some would have, that the matzah that they would eat at the Seder, they would make on Pesach itself. They would go to synagogue for services, and after davening, they would bake matzah. It was called matzah's mitzvah. Unless you're thinking that freshly baked matzah might taste better than 4 months old matzah, I'm told that's not really the case. Matzah pretty much tastes the same. I have heard said that if you want to crisp up your matzah, make it a little bit fresher, you could put it in the oven, and that helps, a little bit. I am sure we will soon be seeing on the market Seder ovens for your matzah to get it to the perfect enjoyable texture. But there was a stringency, there was a concern. If you were really being careful about Pesach and we're really being careful about chametz, you want to bake your matzah before Pesach. Also relates to the rule that any chametz that's part of your Pesach products can be nullified if it's an infinitesimal amount before Pesach, and you don't have that escape clause on Pesach. So you want to bake your matzah before Pesach, and you don't want to do anything with your matzah lest any remaining piece of chametz enter into the equation. So to be very careful, you bake your matzah before Pesach, and you don't cook your matzah. because it's all part of the same package. You're being strict about Pesach. Rabbi Shner Zalman of Ladi, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, in his Shulchan Aruch Harav, expands upon this and says you might be worried that there's a small little tiny piece of flour, right? You mix the flour and the water into dough, but maybe there's a piece of flour that remained and went to the oven, and since they cook it so fast, that one little piece of flour may have escaped being baked, and then when you mix your matzah with water, you're restarting the chametz possible process once again. For that kind of 1 in a million chance, we don't mix any matzah with water. So this is the stringency that emerges over time, this concern of any type of chametz, so avoid any type of matzah with any type of liquid on Pesach. The Raviyah, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yoel Halevi, who's writing in the 13th century, mentions the idea that has extended to all other sorts of Pesach products. Right? We're talking about some of the more popularly consumed cultural products, but there are a whole host of customs that different communities have of things not to eat on Pesach. And the concern is not really of a chametz concern. Sometimes it's the fact, like, for example, there's some communities that don't eat garlic on Pesach because the garlic cloves were shipped with flour, and there might be some lingering flour. What about the fact today that no one does that anymore? As I was, this is the season for traditional movies. It's time to watch the Ten Commandments again, but some of my family had never seen the Fiddler on the Roof. Tradition. Even though there's no flour in the garlic today, we don't eat garlic anymore. Or some people have a practice not to eat any vegetables with peels, and they peel anything that has a peel, apples, tomatoes, anything with a peel, because maybe it touched some chametz in transit, because that was known to have happened once upon a time 300 years ago, so we don't do it. And so that type of a concern is introduced as a theoretical possibility by the Raviyah, because he says, afuisha bishlus, he's talking about matzah that's cooked. Kagon letinokul zaken letakem menu paftal o shilkuk. You want to make them something to eat, the child or the older person who can't chew as well, or it could be that neither of them has teeth. Ein bo mishum chimutz. You don't have to worry about chametz. V'yesh machmirim. There are those who are careful. The lo lisi limites. You don't make a mistake. What kind of mistake was, look, and this would be the application with regards to matzah balls. Matzah balls are made out of matzah meal. It's matzah flour with water. Well, you're reaching for the matzah flour. Maybe you'll reach for the regular flour. Maybe you'll make a mistake. And once you're cooking with flour, and once you're making things with flour and water, we don't want you to make a mistake. And he says, though, very clearly, v'chumra shabal nefeshi. This is a chumrah. This is a stringency. Doesn't say you have to follow this practice. But whether it be the potential, the 1 in a million shot of becoming chametz, like Rav Moshe Amos Nino and Rabbi Shner Zalman of Ladi, or the extra careful concern that you might mix up the products of the Raviyah, this has led to the stringency of avoiding any type of cooking matzah with water, any type of matzah shriya, any type of gebrachs. And that will take us into, if you're not having any type of matzah flour desserts, that will of course lead us into the macaroon popularity in just a moment. But any questions on the Canadal, however you want to spell it, matzah ball, the gebrachts, matzah shriya issue? It is said that this became one of the points of dispute between the Hasidim and their opponents, the Misnagdim, and the Vilna Gaon came down decisively on the part of the Hasidim, the Misnagdim, and you could have matzah balls. And it is a legend that he even hung one in his window to show that this is what's on the menu for Pesach, that it is perfectly okay. The argument was made that, how can you enjoy Pesach if you're being so careful about not mixing matzah with any type of liquid? How does this work even when you put the matzah in your mouth? It goes off into a whole host of situations and complications and, interesting or weird Pesach practices. So if you're not having matzah flour mixed with anything, clearly anything that is flour-free becomes popular. And of course, as they've been able to do all types of different things with potatoes and tapioca and everything like that, you can enjoy all sorts of matzah-free Pesach products. And that led to macaroons. So there's an article, History of Macaroons. Source number 8, Italian Jews later adopted macaroons because there's no flour or leavening. And macaroons go back possibly to Italians in the 7th or 8th century. Macaroons were leavened by egg whites and could be eaten during the 8th-day observation of Passover. It was introduced to other European Jews. It became popular as a year-round sweet. And as different types of ingredients were introduced that enhanced the flavor and taste of the macaroon, so it became part of a staple in the Jewish product shelf. So, for example, coconut, in a particular, coconut that was chopped up became helpful in adding sweetness to the product. So, everyone has to have coconut macaroons. I would say that macaroons, like fruit jelly slices, are no longer necessarily as popular as they used to be. They've been replaced by other types of products, or some of the other candies have taken their place. But, and this was, from an article about the macaroon, source number 9. The 5th question at the Seder: have a macaroon? Already in 1991, it was known that macaroons were not as popular as they used to be. But, and this I thought was a great line that the author of the article mentioned, still, so much about Passover has to do with familiar rituals and sensations that transcend objective culinary analysis. Right? So much of what happens over Pesach, is very much, traditionally what's on the menu. Right? I would imagine if I would ask people, what is your Erev Pesach meal? There are probably a lot of things that, depending on your family's country of origin, there's certain things that are just part of the, certain items appear. Remember, Erev Pesach, you can't eat matzah. You're not going to eat till late at night. You want to have something, what are you going to have? I would imagine potatoes in some form or another are a lot of people's Erev Pesach meal. And then it becomes almost ingrained. So in our family, it was always corned beef and potato salad on the menu. So it's still on the menu. My wife's family, they had liver. That's, maybe it's still on her menu. But it's, I think it's very true that a lot of the sensations transcending objective culinary analysis, in particular, relate to Pesach. That certain things have to be bought. Certain products become part of the Pesach pantry, whether we enjoy them or not, sometimes whether we use them or not. And that's, and we've talked about some of them and how some of it is, having candy. Rabbi Akiva introduced candy into the Seder. So it's not surprising that we'll find ways to have different candies, and, whatever the ingredients are will probably shape which candies we're going to have. Or it will lead, whether or not we're going to mix the matzah with the water, or how we want to have matzah in different forms that will also shape, the matzah ball that we have or don't have, and the like. We'll shift in a minute to certain things that may or may not be on the menu from a halachic perspective. But first, any questions, comments, or reactions? Okay, so one of there is actually a halakhah about what your main course at the Seder should or shouldn't be. And, people can feel free to share what's traditionally on your Seder main course. Although it's kind of interesting that by the time we get to the main course, like, who's hungry? If the matzah, it's so late, blah, blah, blah. I'm sure everyone, as is always the case, I'm not hungry, but I could eat a little. And then 3-4 plates later, everyone is, in a food coma, which is problematic because you actually have to make sure to leave room for the afikoman. But there is a discussion about what kind of meat can be served at the Seder, or whether or not any of the food at the Seder can be roasted. And this, and we'll look at the source in a minute, but it's really all part of the idea that a major component of the Seder is missing without having the Karban Pesach, without having the Paschal Lamb, the sacrifice that was part of the Pesach ritual. And the Paschal Lamb wasn't really the main course. The Paschal Lamb, every person would get a piece, Everyone should have a kazayit, which is just a small olives amount. And everything about the Paschal lamb wasn't that they weren't having roasted lamb as the main course, but they were eating it as part of the Seder. When we talk about what was the main course, we often mention the idea that there was another sacrifice that was brought for the holiday. That was the carbon chagiga. And that was the main course, and that's represented at the Seder by the egg. Of course, the Paschal lamb is represented by the bone, the shank bone. By the way, I'm a big fan. You got to get the shank bone. I don't really know what a shank bone is, other than the fact they sell it at the butcher shop. No chicken necks for me. It's got to be the shank bone. You got to, old school. You got to keep it the OG, and it's got to be the shank bone. If you want to use the chicken neck, that's okay, but that just seems to be a pale substitution. But anyway, we don't have the carbon Pesach, so we have the shank bone to represent the carbon Pesach. We mentioned the carbon Pesach. We recreate the meal as if we have the carbon Pesach, even if it's not there. But one of the ways that this emerges is whether or not there can be roasted meat. And the Shulchan Aruch mentions a couple of customs. Source number 10: in a place where they are accustomed to eat a roast on Passover nights, one may eat it. In a place where they are accustomed to avoid eating it, one may not eat it, as a precaution against people saying this is the Passover sacrifice, right? How can we if we don't have a Passover sacrifice, we don't want anything that even looks like a Passover sacrifice or can be replaced. Well, I don't want people going, this is the Passover sacrifice. It's actually connected to the part of the Seder at the end of the Maggid section of telling the story, where we invoke the Talmudic dictum that one who has not mentioned these three things on Pesach has not fulfilled their obligation: Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. And then we go through each of the things, and a lot of the Haggadahs say that you're supposed to pick up the matzah, and you're supposed to pick up the maror, you're supposed to point to it. But when you say, because you say Pesach zu, you don't point to the bone, because that's not the Paschal lamb. We don't want anything imitating or taking its place. So some extend that to even having any roasted meat. But in any place, it is prohibited to eat an entire roast lamb as one on this night, because it appears like eating sacrificial food outside the temple. If it was in parts, or one limb missing, or one limb boiled, it's permissible where they're accustomed to it. So we are sensitive to this not wanting anything taking place of carbon Pesach. So even if you're accustomed to eat the roast meat, you don't want it to be exactly looking like the carbon Pesach. Right? A few of us today would ever roast a whole lamb. Clearly, that's more of a modern cultural thing. But in places where they would have such type of thing for dinner, you can't have it on Pesach. Ramah: one should neither eat more than sufficiently nor drink more than appropriately, so one should not eat the afikomen with course eating for, or even to get drunk and sleep immediately. Basically, Ramah has a public service announcement in all of this, because make sure you don't eat or drink too much. You still have to save room for the afikomen. Shulchan Aruch continues: even beef or poultry, anything that requires slaughter, is prohibited to eat roast in a place where you're not accustomed to eat roast. So the Shulchan Aruch, remember, said, if you have accustomed to eat roast, it's okay, but you can't eat a whole lamb. Now the Shulchan Aruch says if you have accustomed not to eat roast, then it doesn't matter what the main course is, it can't be roasted. The Ramah: they are accustomed in a few places to eat eggs at the meal in commemoration of mourning, and it seems to me that the reason because the day of the week of the night of Tisha B'Av is set based on the night of Passover. Additionally, in this commemoration of the destruction of the temple, where they bring Passover sacrifices, some are accustomed not to eat any dips on that night, except for the two dips that perform in the Seder. So the Ramah doesn't comment if there's a standard Ashkenazi practice or not. So we're left with what's your custom. But if there's a custom, if you're accustomed to not eat roast, then you have to be careful not to roast your chicken or roast your beef. As Rabbi Eliezer Melamed points out, grilled and smoked meats are considered roasted and are prohibited. Regarding baked meat, there's a dispute about whether it's considered roasted, and one who wishes to be lenient may do so. According to most poskim, frying is not like roasting. Right, so basically, anything that has no liquid, that's not liquid as part of the cooking process, would be problematic for what's served on Pesach. So if you roast chicken, if your custom is not to eat roasted foods, that you have to have some sort of chicken that's cooked with liquid. When I started learning more of the halakhos, it kind of made sense why in my mother's family, Right, the main course of the Seder involved, chicken that had a kind of was cooked with a liquid, and boiled flunken. And in particular, it was boiled flunken, not roasted flunken or anything like that, because roasted meat, the custom was not to eat it. So it's it is interesting. We have some of the cultural foods. We have a halakhic input into the menu that even gauges the cooking process. Frying. I guess no. You could have fried chicken at the Seder. Now, what are you gonna? What's the breading going to be? A separate issue. If you're Nishka Brachs, you can't use the matzah meal crumbs. You got to find the potato ones, whatever. You got to see what's on the shelves in the supermarkets. But we see here that there is direction and halakha guidance in tradition in terms of what's on the menu for the main course. Any questions or comments? Or anyone needs some menu suggestions? Okay.
So, Rabbi, Aviva,
Yes.
what's the relationship, if any, between our Pesach and the Passover that was celebrated by the Hebrews as they left Egypt and finally crossed?
So that one was different because they were still in Egypt. They had matzah in Maror in Carbon Pesach, and so did we. When we had the carbon afterwards, but clearly the whole Sipur Yitziat Mitzrayim component needed Yitziat Mitzrayim.
So there's no food correlation, or it's correlated because they had it, we don't have it because they.
Well, no, the main characters, Pesach, Matzah, Maror, were part of Pesach Mitzrayim and Pesach of the generations. To recreate the Egyptian Pesach, some of that is the customs. People walking out, the chipazon component, walking around the table. That takes us back to, I think maybe the one ritual, the one halakhah that still remains is about finishing it before midnight. That became a sacrifice rule also. But the key ingredients were there then and still there now.
So basically it has no relationship to it.
But no, it's directly correlated. Our Pesach is Pesach Mitzrayim, filtered through the generations because we've actually had the Exodus. Right? If you're sitting that night in Egypt, you did not know what it was like to be free. Okay. You had anticipation, but you didn't have.
We crossed the sea on the 7th day.
Right.
And how long did it take us to get there?
What do you mean? 7 days.
So we left that night.
We left the morning after.
Right. And then I doubt there was any cooking, no food except for the matzah.
Come on, what kind of Jewish meal would it be without leftovers?
I'm just trying to figure out if there's any correlation between any of the minhagim and that.
I'm not sure what you mean. They're all from that. Everything they did, we do. I mean, some things got added later on because, for example, what kind of reclining did they do? What was the reason to recline? They weren't free yet.
Right.
For did they have 4 cups of wine? We have no reference to that. We know that they had Pesach because they had a lamb, and we know that they ate matzah that night, and we know they had maror then.
Yeah. What about fruit slices?
Yeah.
Probably not yet. Look, did they? Were there any bread around? Was there bread around their table? I don't know. They hadn't been given the.
All right.
They had the Shivas Yamim Matzos Tochel. The commandments had been issued. Did they have to vacuum their drapes beforehand? Probably not. But I think definitely there's a correlation that it was their experience that formed the foundation of our experience, except ours gets filtered through the liberation element.
Okay, thanks.
So we talked about the main course. Let's talk about some of the side dishes. And let's face it, side dishes are kind of limited on Pesach because we're limited in what we can serve, especially if you're Ashkenazi and you don't eat kitnia. So, so imagine if you don't eat kitnia, you don't mix matzah and water. So you're basically having, meat and potatoes, carrots, stuff like that. But so it can be very good for if you don't want to have any carbs. You can stick completely to vegetables, but what fun is that? That's where matzah farfel comes from. But where does the whole idea of kitniot emerge out of? So the Gemara talks about what we can make our matzah from and what is considered chametz, and it's captured in Jewish law in source number 12. These are the things through which one fulfills the obligation of eating matzah: wheat, barley, spelt, oats, and rye. And the custom is to take wheat initially, right? That's why we like wheat matzah, and then others emerge in terms of if people have specific needs or tastes. But not rice and other types of legumes, kitniot, and these also do not come to be leavened. It is so permitted to make cooked food from them, right? Anything that now the rice and legumes is perfectly fine. Rama, those three little words which changed the world forever, and some forbid it. And the custom in Ashkenaz is to be strict about this, and one should not change it. However, it is obvious that they do not render cooked food forbidden after the fact that they fall into it. So if your rice, a little bit of rice falls into your Pesach food, it doesn't necessarily make it completely chametz. And same if they're permitted to light with oils that are made for them, and these oils do not render cooked food forbidden, they fall into it. Also permissible to store types of legumes in the home. You don't have to sell it, right? And he mentions a few products: dill seed, anise, and coriander, are not types of legumes permissible to eat them on Pesach. And so does it appear correct to me. So here we have the Sephardic practice of allowing kitniot, the Ashkenazic practice of forbidding it. Rama adds those words of one should not change it. Now, what did happen over time is that plenty of products were added to it, right? Corn, Ashkenazic treat as kitniot. There was no corn in the times of the Rama, right? And corn is food indigenous to North America. Actually, it had been discovered already, but certainly there was no corn in the times of the rabbis. So, and then furthermore, all the different products and the way they take products or make oil from products and adding peanuts to the list and adding all sorts of things, it clearly emerges post the Ramah and generally is associated with the Chumrah de Pischa that we mentioned before, being strict on Pesach. But the Ramah's terms of one should not forbid it, some forbid it, and one should not change it, became words that made it very difficult to loosen up the practice. And if anything, it's gotten stricter and stricter and more expansive. I would say in Israel, where there's a mingling of the Ashkenazim and Sephardim, there's certainly less adherence to the products not mentioned by the Ramah. So for example, the Ramah mentions that if things are mixed together, it doesn't make it chametz after the fact, or it doesn't make it problematic after the fact. So items that have kitniot derivatives that are mixed in the ingredients, that in Israel are marked kosher lePesach leochle kitniot bilvad, only for those who eat kitniot. Well, unless it's something made out of rice or corn, there are many Ashkenazim who will follow the letter of the Ramah and say, look, it's mixed in, it was already made. What's the problem? So you see more of that, especially as you have, more Ashkenazim and Sephardim marrying each other, and families have both practices and the like. But Shulchan Aruch says Sephardim don't have to worry about it. Ashkenazim, the Ramah says, do, and we should not change it. So Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, who was the chief rabbi of Israel, passed away a number of years ago, was discussing, obviously, kind of, haha, you Ashkenazim, you can't eat kitniot, but we Sephardim are right. And how do I know we're right? So he talks about that there was Rabbi Yaakov Emden, quotes in the name of his father, the Chacham Tzvi, that my father was very upset. Kama tsar nitztaer. He was very upset that Ashkenazim maintained this practice of not eating kitnios. And he says, if I had the energy, if I had the strength, I would get rid of this minhag garua halaz. I get rid of this strange practice. Because it's a stringency that leads to a leniency. How? People end up getting confused with regard to chametz, because mito she'ein orez umina kinios mitzuyim lahem lechol lisbo tzrichim lefos matzah harbe mod. Since you have no carbs, you end up eating more matzah, which means you bake more matzah. Ve'ein yizar b'yisa kadas halakhah. The more matzah you make, the more likely it is that mistakes will be made in the matzah, and some of the matzah won't be baked properly. And also, come on, it ruins their enjoying the holiday with such a limited menu. Someone should smash these stringencies into the rock and shatter them. And Ashkenazim should enjoy their holiday and not have to make too much matzah and not come to possibly have chametz in their matzah. And that was his practice.
And not have to buy Trader Joe's matzah.
Oh yeah, although the Trader Joe's is cheaper than Manischewitz, but still, free 5 pounds beats it all. But Rabbi Avad Yosef concludes, Ein la'achenu Ashkenazim l'shanos min hagam shenagu lahachmir mikan masdana limana mechilas oros kines Pesach. Ashkenazim, alas, we're based on tradition. The Ramah says we cannot change that custom, and therefore you're stuck. He concludes. As much as he would like all people to be Sephardic, you guys are stuck, and you still have to be more creative in your menu because kinios is not allowed. So this is also this also impacts the menu on the halachic perspective. The main course can't be roasted, and your side dishes, Ashkenazim, can't be kidney. Yes, Aviva.
The May kitnios that you brushed over so quickly, it became more stringent as I grew up. You could only get noodles. You could only do certain things. And all of a sudden, May kitnios are not allowed.
Right, the corn syrup's not allowed. All these types of things.
No, I wouldn't put corn syrup in the same category of the nuts.
Well, there was nuts are allowed on Pesach. You're allowed to eat nuts on Pesach. Nuts are kosher for Pesach. Peanuts are not, but peanuts are peanuts are different.
Nutola, the oil that was used, peanut oil that we use.
But correct, but you could have cashew oil, you could cashew butter, all types of things.
When there was only peanut oil.
When you what?
When I grew up a long time ago, there was only peanut oil, and everyone used peanut oil.
Right. Also correct. So those are things that I mentioned that have become things have been added to the list, which really make no sense. So I think peanut oil is fine. Now, plenty of people have found other oils that they're used to using. Some people don't cook with peanut oil, so they would rather use avocado oil instead of peanut oil. Even if let's say I matzah peanut oil to everyone here. Who's running out to buy the peanut oil? Is that what you really want to cook with? I don't know. Maybe you do.
I'm just saying, kitnios was never an issue when I grew up, and now it's a big issue.
I agree with you, Aviva. I remember the same thing. My parents growing up always cooking with peanut oil in the kitchen, and now it's usser. I agree with you.
So I matzah peanut oil. I just don't think people would use it as quickly anymore.
It's a general May kitnios question, not just.
But I'm not sure. There's no such thing as May kitniot. I don't know what May kitniot is. You use the term as if it's a thing.
Yeah.
There are derivatives. There are derivatives of kitniot. So there's corn oil, which technically should be fine. I don't think people use corn oil. Now in the Israeli products, the ice creams that are made with it, when they talk about ochla kitniot bilvad, there are those who are more lenient. But I think that, other than peanuts.
Bilvad is because they all have derivatives of kitniot.
Right, so that's the derivatives of kitniot. Now that might be what you mean by May kitniot.
Derivatives of kitnios when I grew up used to be allowed.
But like what? They used to have corn oil?
So I gave you the example of peanut oil.
But peanut oil is not peanuts are not kitniot. I mean, what's happening in Israel now is that people are eating corn oil in their ice creams because it's a derivative. It's what you call May kitniot. But that's not something that people were used to allow and then prohibited. Those were things that were always not consumed by Ashkenazim, but are being consumed by some Ashkenazim in Israel today because of the fact that, there's so many Sephardim in Israel and the cultures have intertwined, as well as the fact that people are starting to think of, wait a second, it makes no sense for these derivatives of kitniot to be prohibited based on what the Ramah said. So they're kind of trying to restore things to the way they should have been before all the chumras got added. Peanuts and peanut oil are only the latest example of things which have been added, and I think that's really where where the changes are. There are a couple of other types of oil too that certain things which I forgot. I think canola oil is one of those subjects that comes up that has really no reason for being problematic that some do view as kitniot. But that might be the latest example of something similar to the peanut to get added to the list. And a lot of it is because there's so much of it. You go to the kosher store, whatever's on the shelf is what you're going to buy. So that's that also has shaped a lot of the consumer choices.
Excuse
But,
me, Rabbi.
Yes.
I'm very confused about peanut oil. This is the first I heard of it as being an option.
Well, it is not generally considered an option because, as was mentioned, the peanuts the peanuts have left the building.
Right.
But the peanut, even when peanuts left the building, peanut oil was slower to leave the building because if peanuts shouldn't be kitniyot, then peanut oil is definitely not kitniyot. And remember, the Ramah says that the derivatives of kitniyot aren't necessarily kitniyot either. So, if technically corn oil is not kitniyot, then peanut oil certainly is not kitniyot. But as you move further along and you kind of tighten up your stringencies and chumrah de pischa, and those communities that are strict enter into the kosher consumer base, you're going to start, you're going to continue to build walls around certain products because, and remember, and this comes up too. People say, Sephardim who eat rice, they have to check their rice,
Right.
to consume it. And just this year, a number of colleagues have been pointing out on a rabbinic listserv about chametz being found in the rice. Right, that goes back to the whole quinoa controversy, that maybe some grains floated into where the quinoa is being grown, and that's why only certain brands were allowed, et cetera, et cetera. So there have always been legitimate concerns with even eating rice on Pesach without being sure that there's no chametz. So, how much more so you're going to be careful on products that aren't necessarily fully supervised for Pesach? How do you know the peanut oil wasn't, I don't know, contaminated with some type of chametz? And, that general conservative approach of being more stringent on Pesach has led to peanut oil also leaving the building. And that's if you want to use it in the first place.
I have a question. When you say rice turning something else into chametz,
Yes.
rice is not chametz.
No, so that's what the Ramah says. Since it's not chametz, it doesn't forbid your kosher for Passover dish to be no longer kosher for Passover if it gets mixed in. Doesn't mean you can't do it l'chachila. You can't add rice as an ingredient under the assumption that it's not going to make something chametz. But if it was and it's batel,
it's chametz.
Huh?
If it's not chametz.
But it is still Pesach prohibited for
Do it,
Ashkenazim.
Yeah, but okay, but it doesn't make it chametz.
It makes it non-edible for Pesach.
Get back, Rabbi.
So that is so kitniyot opens up a whole can of worms and jealousies towards the Sephardim. And remember, they have to say slichot for 40 days every year before Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. So I don't know if people have tried to offer a deal. If I say slichot for those 40 days, can I eat kitniyot? It just there's it changes the whole menu. It's not quinoa sushi, it's regular sushi. It's there are all sorts of things that get changed. But for the most part, it's a combination. I think we certainly, there's nothing technically stopping us from having peanut oil again, other than the fact that we would have to just investigate how it's manufactured, as well as find it in our Pesach stores where we're shopping. And I think that and as time has gone by, again, I don't have the same memories of using peanut oil, but if I hadn't used it in 20, 25 years or ever on Pesach, now knowing that it's okay on Pesach, it probably doesn't fit into my menu anymore. Meaning I have my recipes, I have my stuff. I'm not gonna, peanut oil is not that good. If you tell me I could start using rice again, I would change things. But, for the peanut oil, it just might not be worth it. So wherever you're buying your matzah, or whether you eat fruit, jellies, candies or not, I do hope you eat matzah balls. Although some Pesach programs that don't serve gebrachs serve potato starch matzah balls. It's just not the same. But sometimes, you got to do what you got to do. However you want to slice it, I hope everyone has a chag kasher v'sameh.
Thank you.